Hi, Year 3. Today we are looking at fractions on a number line. Now, we already know that we can write one whole as the number 1 because we know that one whole coloured in with all of its pieces coloured would be one full whole. Now, we learned yesterday about mixed fractions, that fractions can actually be bigger than one whole. So we know that we can add our whole and our small fraction together and join them together to make a mixed fraction. We also learned that you need to make sure that when you do write your numbers for your mixed fraction, that you have the whole part of the fraction, of the mixed fraction, much bigger than the small part of the actual fractional part. Okay, so this is not what it should look like. This is what it should look like. Now we can place numbers on fractions on a number line, just like we normally would put normal numbers on a number line when counting. Okay, because you can count using fractions. So the example I've got here is quarters. So we can do 1/4. The next one would be 2/4. The next one would be 3/4. The next one would be 4/4. Or we could also write one whole for 4/4, because if you've got 4 of all of the 4 pieces colored in, it means you have one whole. Okay, so we're going to try some examples together. So we can have a look at this number line down here, and we can see that we are actually counting in tenths. Now we know this because we can see that the denominator for these numbers is 10. Okay, now we can see that it's going up one at a time because this gap in here goes from 2/10 to 3/10, and we know that's going up one at a time. We can see that pattern there. Okay, so if we're starting at 0 and we're counting in tenths, I think I can tell that my first one is going to be 1/10. So I've got 1/10, 2/10, 3/10. What's my next one going to be? Say it out loud. 4/10, 5/10. My next one's going to be 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10, and then 1, or you can also say 10/10. Okay, so I promise you it's really easy, and once you learn how to do it, you'll be unstoppable. You'll know exactly how to do it. Okay, all right, I'm going to practice some examples with you now. Okay, so I've got my first number line here. It starts at 0 because we have nothing, and we're trying to get to one whole, which is up the other end here. Okay, I'm counting in quarters. I've got 1/4. What's the next quarter that comes to my mind? I'm not going to write 1/4 again because I've already written it here. It's the next one up. If I was to color them in, so if I had my circle here and I had 1/4 colored in, if I colored another one in, I would have 2/4. If I colored a third one in, I would have 3/4. Now that stops now because when it goes into, when all of the pieces are colored in, if you can see here, it gives us the same as one whole like this one here, or you could also represent it as 4 fours. Okay, alrighty, moving down to our next example. This one's a little bit more trickier because you haven't got the starting one for you. Now we can see it's counting in thirds because the denominator here is 3, and we can see that there is 1, 2, 3 jumps before we get to the full whole. Okay, so here's my whole again. I'm splitting it into thirds. All right, I know that before 2 is the number. If I'm counting, the number before 2 is 1, and I'm counting in thirds. So I've got 1/3, 2/3, 1/3, 2/3, and then 3/3, which is the same as the 1 because the whole is colored in, or I could also write it like this. Okay, alrighty, moving down to this next one. We learned yesterday about mixed fractions. So remember that a fraction can be bigger than just one whole. Okay, so this one's counting in halves. So if you were counting in halves in the normal, just normally in maths or something like that, you would say half, 1, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4. Guess what? That's exactly the same as fractions, and that's how we're going to write it, is exactly the same. Okay, so if we're going from 0, half, 1, what's my next mixed fraction going to be? Have a think. 1 and a half. Now remember, 1 is my whole because it's full. Everything's colored in. My half now needs to be, oh, that was a silly one, needs to be the little part. So I'm going 0, half, 1, 1.5, 2. My next one's going to be 2 and a half. Nailed it. We're great mathematicians in year 3.